Welcome. Good evening. Thanks for coming to our post-debate wrap-up. There are two ways to relate to reality. One way is the way that we usually do, the way that most people relate to reality, in terms of interpretations, in terms of circumstances, in terms of what our ideas of what is going on consists of, a narration, an interpretation of, well, I'm here and I'm in Berkeley and I'm in this room and all these people are here and these various things are going on. There's these funny lights flashing and all of this. And, or I'm in my job and I don't like it, or I like it a lot and I'm going to get rich, or, nobody loves me, everybody hates me, guess I'll go eat worms. I mean, all these various stories we tell ourselves in terms of the interpretation of what we think is happening here. Now, all of these interpretations are inaccurate. They cannot be accurate because what this actually is cannot be interpreted. It cannot be defined in terms of specific circumstances, in terms of any specifics whatsoever, because what this actually is does not resolve itself. It does not come together into simple coherences, into simple entities, into simple conditions that we can then navigate within, that we can define ourselves in terms of, that we can define others in terms of, that we can define our lives in terms of. So all these definitions that we are so expert at creating, that we are so addicted to orienting towards, are complete fabrications, are complete fantasies, are complete delusion, are completely non-existent. They are not real. They are not actual. And yet, what this actually is entirely available, is entirely accessible. It is always right here. In fact, nothing other than reality is right here at all times. This is the only condition that can be present. Unreality cannot be present. What would it be made of? How could unreality present itself? What would be presenting? It would be something non-existent presenting itself. How? How would that work? So reality is always present, is always available, is always explicit, is always clearly available. We are clearly engaged with reality, and yet, because of the nature of reality, because of the very slippery, open-ended nature of reality, it is so easy to misinterpret what is present in terms of our oversimplifications, in terms of our definitions of what we think we are, what we think our circumstances are, what we think space and time are, what we think causality is, what we think all of these apparent conditions are that are actually entirely non-existent. The condition is very much like a dream. In a dream, we may think, I'm supposed to meet somebody over there, and I have to get over there so I can meet them, and I can talk to them about something very important, and I really have to get over there. And so there's all of this, investment and involvement in terms of circumstances, in terms of conditions, which essentially the imagination is defining into existence as a fantasy. In actuality, in a dream, you don't have to meet anyone. Nothing's going to happen if you meet them. You aren't even in the dream. Your body that's appearing in the dream isn't really there. The body of the person you're supposed to meet that's appearing in the dream isn't really there because it's a dream. So in the face of the fact of what it actually is, these interpretations are revealed as entirely inaccurate, entirely delusional, entirely unreal. And yet what is real, which is, in the case of a dream, is the dreaming itself, is entirely explicit. The dream is, of course, present all the time. When the dream is present, there's the dream. And nothing other than that is happening. When you dream, a dream is present. Dreaming is present. And that's the only actual event that is in existence at that time. And all of these apparent, interpreted into existence circumstances don't actually exist. They're fantasies, they're oversimplifications, they're interpretations that are based on nothing. And exactly the same condition applies in here, what we call the waking condition. What is actually going on here, what this actually is completely inconceivable, completely ungraspable, completely undefinable, completely unresolvable. You cannot pin this down. You cannot find what it is. You cannot get to the bottom of it. It's open. It's open-ended openness. It has astounding properties. It presents itself in terms of all of these amazing characteristics, all of this detail, all of these colors and sounds and lights and textures, and we don't even have words for most of the characteristics that are present in this amazing presence. And yet none of this presence, even though it's the basis for and the evidence for our interpretations, none of this presence actually exists in the way that our interpretations imply, in the way that our interpretations define it as existing. And simply discovering that this is the case, simply noticing that this is the case, can give you access to noticing and appreciating the actuality of this condition and the implications of this noticing, the implications of what this is astounding. In terms of our interpretations, we can seem to be limited, we can seem to be suffering, we can seem to be trapped in cause and effect, we can seem to be dependent upon all sorts of things, we can seem to be small, we can all of these sorts of things. And in terms of, if you notice what this actually is, there's no basis for any of those kinds of interpretations. When you notice what this actually is, you discover there's nothing here but this itself. There's nothing whatsoever here but this itself. And you are that. You are this astoundingness, this openness, this inconceivability, this undefinability, this limitlessness that is intrinsically dependent upon absolutely nothing, absolutely free of cause and effect, absolutely unlimited, absolutely open-ended, absolutely infinite. It is actually that. It is like that. It is, and it's plain to see that it's like that if you simply notice what is present and the way that it is present. So, you could say there's a choice. You could say you can relate to this as it actually is, which is plain to see, or you can relate to it in terms of our addiction to definitions and narrations and storylines and interpretations and defining, oh, I'm this and you're that and this is this and this is that and this is happening and that's happening and I hope this happens and I hope that doesn't happen. All of these kinds of narratives that are, it turns out, wholly without basis and are a basis only for confusion and pain and suffering, needlessly, because there's nothing there. They aren't real. They aren't actual. They're complete delusions. They're complete, it's like a crazy person who thinks they're Hitler or something. They don't need to fear of the Nuremberg trials because they're not Hitler. So the fact that they're afraid that they're Hitler is just their insanity. It's entire delusion. So you can have this big suffering built up based on absolutely nothing, based on a supposition which is not true. It is not true that you are in a body. It is not true that you are limited. It is not true that you were born. It is not true that you will die. It is not true that you have any limitation whatsoever. And the implications of that are very beautiful. And technically speaking, you might say that from a spiritual point of view, the most powerful implication is liberation. When you discover that this is the case, when you discover what this actually is, what you actually are, you discover immediately and completely obviously that there is no basis for suffering. There is no basis for any kind of incompleteness. There is no basis for any kind of partiality. There is no basis for anything other than an astounding positivity, an astounding radiance, an astounding luminosity, an astounding shining life. All that is here is an infinitely shining life force. And you are that. And simply noticing that that is the case is all that's necessary. You don't need to achieve it, because it's already achieved. It already is the case. All that is necessary is simply to notice that fact, to discover that. And it's completely discoverable because it's obviously displayed. How do you all like the new improved light show? I assume there's some thumbs up. I can't see anything. I'm being blinded here. Just a sec, we'll get the mic. Yeah, if you're new here, if you have anything you'd like to say, if you wouldn't mind speaking into the microphone, then that way people who are listening along online can hear what you have to say.
Watch the lights. Yeah. Well, I have a question about suffering and spirituality. So you had mentioned the Nuremberg trials, and I enormously started thinking about the Holocaust. So my question is, if people did suffer during the Holocaust, am I to assume that they were not enlightened, or they hadn't, or is it possible that some of the people who did experience the Holocaust were able to go on some kind of a spiritual path and liberate themselves?
Certainly it's possible. Enlightenment, or which is a very fancy, glorified term, possibly a better term is realization, simply realizing what this is, realizing what is actually the case, removes suffering. It removes suffering entirely. It does not remove pain.
No.
It does not remove sensation. But it removes any kind of an interpretation where one sort of a sensation is preferable to another sensation. And this is very subtle, because there is intrinsic preference that arises as a characteristic of impartial radiance. So, for example, if you were experiencing pain, say you touch something hot, you might try to pull your hand away to stop the pain. And that's absolutely fine, of course. But there's no need for any suffering involved. That's just a spontaneous play of energies unfolding. It's if the interpretation enters is where suffering is generated. So the events of the Holocaust are a typical event of unfolding of energy systems. Every time red ants and black ants try and kill each other.
Right.
So every time a tribe of black ants encounters a tribe of red ants, then there's this big war and they're all killing each other. And you might say, oh, this is so horrible, they're hurting each other, they shouldn't be doing this, why can't we all just get along? Sort of thing. But it's just, it's an energy event. Black ants, red ants try and kill black ants, Nazis try and kill non-Aryans or whatever, right? But this is simply energy systems playing themselves out, and the way individuals respond to that is also the same energy system playing itself out. It's like a weather system. You know, when a low pressure comes in and hits in a high pressure, and there's all of this, sound and fury and winds and clouds can come and there can be storms and thunderstorms and hurricanes and things. But that's not a problem. That's just energy systems interacting impersonally. And likewise with biological systems, we see energy systems interacting impersonally. The interpretation of it being personal as we're suffering it is, this is happening to me, it shouldn't be happening. This is horrible, we like it on this one.
So the suffering comes from personally identifying with something.
From misunderstanding what the event is, misunderstanding what you are in the context of the event, and misunderstanding the implication. Misunderstanding that, the assumption that it shouldn't be happening, or this is horrible, or, just these sorts of interpretations, which are, again, pure fantasies. The fact is that there is this transcendental event right here. And this event shows up as an intricate, an inconceivable, infinite fractal display of energy unfolding, all of which is interacting with itself on every level. Right? So, and all of the events that we interpret, whether we interpret them as personal or impersonal or biological or physical or whatever, are this one same energy event unfolding in its different aspects. So, right now galaxies are colliding and stars are exploding. Right now there's genocide happening. Right now there's red ants attacking black ants. Right now there's whole tribes, whole vast arenas of beings living smoothly and effortlessly. But they're all trying to eat each other. It's not a problem. Life forms eat other life forms. It's not a bad thing. It's not a basis, So suppose you discover that some flesh-eating bacteria has invaded your body and is eating you alive. It's just eating. It's just lunchtime with the bacteria. You think it's a big problem. And so, okay, great. So you take some antibiotics, you go see a doctor and try and get rid of it. That's fine. But again, this is just the energy system playing itself out. It's not good or bad. It's not a basis for suffering. It may or may not involve the presence of pain, but pain is just another transcendental energy display. I don't know if I put that very coherently.
No,
It's hard to put coherently. Again, it's a matter of relating to this in terms of interpreting it to be this or that, versus relating to it as it actually is, as an inconceivable, open-ended, and yet very dynamic and present, and let's say characteristic filled
right.
event. Another way to look at it, let's say another way to put it, it might be a little clearer. Imagine a computer playing chess with itself. It's playing both sides of the game. So, if the black is winning or if the white is winning, it doesn't matter because no one's winning. It's just an energy system playing itself out. And likewise, this one event right here is playing all sides of every game. So this one event is doing the black ants and doing the red ants. This one event is doing the Nazis and doing the Jews. This one event is doing the flesh-eating bacteria and doing you and the antibiotics and the garbage. So it doesn't care who wins because nothing is gained and nothing is lost. See? And when you see what this is, you will know that and you won't care who wins. Because you will see that you are this transcendental event that cannot gain anything, cannot lose anything, cannot achieve anything, and cannot fail at anything. So there's all of this inconceivably complex, detailed display, and yet nothing's actually happening. Nothing's actually being ventured, nothing's actually being overed, nothing can be won and nothing can be lost. The shape's changing, the energy's changing, the energies are continually morphing from one to another. Pleasure morphs into pain, morphs into indifference, life morphs into death, waking morphs into sleep, morphs into dream, light morphs into dark. I mean, it's a good experience. It's always like that. It's completely obviously like that. And yet, it never becomes anything other than this event. Even as all of these apparitions are continually morphing, absolutely and intrinsically unstable.
So, judging an event in history like the Holocaust, or I don't know what's happening, say, in Syria today.
It's an energy imbalance rectifying itself and playing itself out.
Right.
It's just like a hurricane. A hurricane is high pressure and low pressure. You don't go, oh, that evil low pressure, how come it has the nerve to come and ruin this nice high pressure? It's not like that, is it? It's just low pressure and high pressure. So because there's a tension between the two, naturally there's a dynamic interaction which equilibrates them, right? And then likewise with social events, with biological events, you get hungry, so you try to go find something to eat. So there's an imbalance, an energy imbalance within the system that tries to rectify itself. And yet what you want to eat might not want to be eaten if it happens to be alive and motivational.
Right.
Right? It's just another example. But it's not personal. It's just energy. The energy, imbalances within the relative apparent imbalances within the energy system, dynamically interacting in a dance of finding equilibrium, in a dance of working themselves out. So there's no good guys or bad guys. There's no heroes and no villains.
Somehow I sort of still feel, I guess, the need to judge or justify certain things, but I could still see how, in a larger sense, that's just part of being part of a social energy pattern. That's what social, when you're part of a society or a community of humans, that's what we do.
Sure. And this brings up a very interesting and important point, which is that our personality structures are also impersonal energy.
Right.
So we have preferences, we have our personalities, we're Republican or we're Democrat, we're this or we're that, and that's not a problem at all, because that is also, just another instance, as everything is, of this astounding energy system dancing with itself, of this astounding energy system moving dynamically within itself, exploring virtual inequalities. And so it's completely impersonal.
Yeah, I think that's sort of the key. I think is for me is to try and not get stuck on any one, particular viewpoint or play devil's advocate or something, because it seems sort of a natural thing to do, to want to be right or to have the right opinion.
Yeah, but that wanting to be right and these points of view, if you look at what they are, where they come from, what's doing them, what maintains them, they are entirely mysterious and miraculous apparitions. I mean, where does it come from? Where does these ideas come from? Where does the preference come from? Where does a desire to be right come from? Where does the psychological urges come from? They just miraculously show up. It's like a motivation's in a dream. You're in deep sleep, nothing's happening, all of a sudden you're dreaming, and all of a sudden there's all these important events going on, and there's all this motivation. I really have to go and do something, or I really don't want to do that, or whatever. All within the dream, right? Mm-hmm. Where does that come from? Where do these motivations come from? There's nothing there. You're asleep, there's no motivation. And all of a sudden you start dreaming, and patterns appear, and these interpretations of the patterns appear, and motivations appear, and emotional reactions appear, and all of these things appear. What are they made of? Where do they come from? What's doing that? They just show up like a cloud in the sky. There's a blue sky, and all of a sudden a little cloud starts to show, and it just builds, and then there's a big cloud sitting there. There was no cloud. At one point there was no cloud, and then there's a cloud. Where did it come from? At one point there was no motivation, and then there's a motivation. Where did it come from? At one point there was no point of view, and then there's a point of view. Where does it come from? And again, where does everything come from? Right now I have all these red and green lights shining in my eyes. Where do they come from? They weren't there. There was a time when there were no red and green lights shining in my eyes, and now they're shining in my eyes. And then there's going to be another time coming when there's no red and green lights shining in my eyes. How is that? What's doing that?
Yeah, I think that right. But I guess that's another important aspect of that type of question I was asking, was the questioning or the examining, just not making any final assumption, because there can't be a final.
It's very simple. You can notice that the simple fact is you don't know conclusively what anything is.
Right.
Okay? And if you notice that fact, it's very powerful. You cannot actually have a powerful opinion about something if you know that you don't know what it is. Having a strong opinion about something is based upon some kind of an unconscious or conscious conviction that you actually know what it is. Whereas, in actuality, you can't know anything is. You can't know anything is. You can't know how it happens, you can't know what it is, you can't know what you are, you can't know what. So it's all guesswork, it's all up in the air. And on that basis, that undermines the decisiveness with which we can get words up about it, with which we can, have a very specific opinion about it. Righteousness, a righteous, strong opinion about something is based on thinking you know what something actually is. Oh, those Nazis were evil. Why not kill all those Jews? Is that really true? Do you know that? Do you know what killing is? Do you know what the Nazis were? Do you know why they appeared? Do you know how they appeared? Do you know what the Jews were? Do you know why they appeared? Do you know how they appeared? Do you know? It's this inconceivably complex energy system, unfolding across space and time, that came together as this inconceivably complex event that played itself out in space and time. Do you really know what it is? Do you really know what was happening? And of course, the obvious and actual fact is no.
Right.
And because that is the fact, you can notice it, you can discover it, you can come to appreciate that you can't know what anything is. And when you begin to see that, you begin to see what this is. You can't know what this is. It's like a dream. When you're in a dream, you can have strong opinions about things that are going on only when you think you know what they are. When you see that you're dreaming, all these strong opinions just dissolve because you see it's a dream, and a dream is a mystery. A dream is nothing. A dream is, all of our certainties, all of the definability is just out the window when you see a dream. And this is very much like that. This is very much like a dream, where it is an astounding and miraculous apparition that is occurring entirely uninterpreted, entirely undefinable, entirely beyond the realm of anything that you can wrap your mind around. Turn up. There's the bus knob is? It's the two red knobs. There's the red knob on my right hand. Not on the right, on the left. Make sure they're all the way up. Ba, 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 ba. Not the fader, the red knobs. Testing. Oh yeah, that's much better. It's loud now. We're okay.
Peter, staying on the same theme as the last question. Excuse me. Could you address the situation of someone who is aware of reality and truth? Does he continue to act? It sounds like you're saying he does, but for instance, say the Nazis are invading France and I become a resistance fighter and then I become realized. Is it possible for me to continue with the resistance, or would I sit down and become a stump, which is often the way it's portrayed, in literature.
Right.
Could you address that whole situation?
Absolutely. Yes, in realization and liberation is not the cessation of apparent action, but it's the realization that action is not personal, but it never was personal, so there's no surprise that it may continue spontaneously. In other words, all action, all motivation has never been personal. No one has ever had a personal motivation. Motivation appears impersonally, objectively, miraculously, just the same way the sun in the sky appears. It just is there. What's the sun there? Who's doing the sun? It's just there. And likewise, our motivations are just there. And in realization, you see this fact, you discover this fact that everything is just here, and there's no longer an identification with, I'm doing this, or I, need to not do it, or this matters to me, or any of these kinds of things. You discover that all event is a transcendental inconceivability that is doing itself. So you're completely off the hook as a doer, as an enactor of motivation, and yet apparent motivation can seem to appear. The same way as it always was. And again, with realization realization is just discovering what is already the case, what has always been the case. So it's not a change of condition. It's not a change of orientation. It is simply discovering what this has always been. So there never has been personal motivation. The idea that there's personal motivation is entirely interpreted into existence in imagination.
Would that imply that the trajectory of the person acting out of confusion would continue on in the same trajectory beyond realization, or are all bets off?
Well, all bets are off because there's no trajectory. You could say there's an apparent trajectory, but the trajectory is not actually like that. What is actually happening is entirely inconceivable and entirely unanalyzable. So what seems to be a trajectory, what seems to be a personality structure, what seems to be a motivational nexus, or a Freudian acting out or whatever, is not actually any of those things. And all those interpretations are erroneous and have always been so.
So a person wouldn't think at the beginning of his spiritual path that he's going to be a bodhisattva type. He would be better advised to just find out what reality is and then see what happens.
Well, it doesn't matter, because at the beginning of the spiritual path, so to speak, one can't possibly conceive of where one is going. It's absolutely inconceivable. So there's no way to, there's no, you might say, efficient preparation.
And I presume that from the point of view of the far side of the realization, a bodhisattva is not a bodhisattva in any case.
Of course not.
I had another question that I've been thinking about for some time, that I'd like to have a little more clarity than I presently have about noticing. I've been noticing, in a sense, seems to be searching, because you're trying to notice something. Now, I don't want to accuse you of doing that, but this is one take that I've had. And so I'm comparing and contrasting that with the idea of being the witness, the sakshi, just simply impartially witness everything that's happening. Is noticing and witnessing identical, or is there a differentiation between them?
Noticing is discovering that you are intrinsically and always have been the witness. So noticing is not witnessing per se, as opposed to some condition of non-witnessing. Noticing is the discovery that witnessing is what is happening here.
That makes it difficult for me to conceive of noticing as any kind of a practice.
Well, it's not.
Anything more on that?
Well, noticing is experience. Noticing is experience as it is. And experience as it is always experience as it is, even when it's being misinterpreted. So noticing paradoxically is the discovery of what this is and has always been. It's not a practice because it cannot be done, and yet it can be appreciated.
Yes, I can see that point.
And you could say noticing is the discovery of this appreciation.
So noticing is not so much a doing as a waiting, is it?
As a what?
A kind of waiting. All you can do is really wait for...
No, it's not a waiting, it's a discovery. And the discovery is ongoingly happening every instant.
Oh.
And and the appreciation of that discovery can seem to wax and wane. But the general trend is for it to continue to grow. I mean, this is what spiritual unfoldment could be said to consist of, is the development of appreciation of this noticing, of this astoundingness that is happening here.
I think I see.
And all of these so-called spiritual practices basically all experience whatsoever is nothing other than the proving ground, so to speak, for this event to discover itself, to hone itself, to come to appreciate itself more and more subtly. All life experience is that. I mean, all life is spiritual practice. All of life is that. You know, when a teenager is so excited because he finally gets to go out with his buddies and get drunk and steal magazines in a store or whatever it is that he does that he thinks is exciting, that's a spiritual practice. That's an experiment. That's, pushing against the box. That's seeing what the possibilities are, which is, most likely a rather crude and unsubtle version of that. And as our unfoldment progresses, we become progressively more subtle and refined in the kinds of experiments we run, and they end up not having much in the way of outward display whatsoever. And we're just exploring different ways of orienting within this astoundingness, and basically discovering its open-endedness more and more subtly, more and more profoundly. But it's all the same fundamental event, it's all the same spiritual practice, so to speak, just on different levels of subtlety, different levels of sensitivity.
I see. I think I see. So, as I understand that, there's a reality that's always present, always has been present, and will always be present, and it, for some reason, just gradually comes over the horizon and becomes more close, or maybe comes closer into focus as we go along.
Well, yeah, you could say it is exploring itself. It is coming to appreciate itself more and more subtly on an eternally ongoing basis. And this is what we call reality, this is what we call experience, this is what we call our lives. But it is doing it, it is enacting it, it is appreciating it, it is the one that is developing itself through, inconceivably. And of course, that's not actually happening. That's just a very crude and no doubt completely inaccurate way of euphemizing what is happening.
And so it is gradually noticing itself.
Mm-hmm. It is coming to appreciate itself more and more subtly.
Well, that leaves us with very little to do, I guess.
No more or less than ever. There never has been anything to do.
All right. Well, thank you.
That's never stopped us, has it?
No, it hasn't. I'm sure we'll continue on. Thank you.
On the same subject, what is the experience, the dreaming? I call it the substance, and then the substance generates the content.
Right. Yes.
And the substance, as you say, is unknown and unknowable.
Yes. But actual.
But actual.
Yes.
Invisible, untouchable, unknown, unknowable.
Well, it's invisible and untouchable, but it's also visible and touchable.
The content, it generates its visible content.
Well,
and touchable.
The content and the substance are actually one.
Yes, because the substance generates the content.
Yeah, but it's not like one thing generating another. It's like because of the substance, the content appears to be content, but it's not actually. Like when you dream, it can seem to be people and cars and houses and all sorts of things can seem to be there. So that can be said to be the content, all these things, but the only substance there is the dreaming.
Yes.
But the content itself is actually nothing but dreaming. So the content actually is the substance. And when you see that, then you see reality. Then you see, it's not like the content, it's not like the substance is underneath the content. This is the substance. This is the transcendental radiance right here. It's also a table. But it's not really a table. What it really is radiance, transcendental radiance. This is the substance. So content, as content, is a misinterpretation of substance, and substance alone is present in the way you're putting it. In other words, they're not two things.
Yes, they are not two things. As if one generates itself or births itself. The multitudes of itself,
Yes.
or the infinity of itself.
Yes.
And it loses itself in itself.
Yes.
And then it is recognizing itself in itself.
Yes, exactly so.
And the noticing is as if it is self-aware.
Uh-huh.
Is self-aware the same as you would say noticing?
Yes, exactly so. Yes. Yeah, very good. Yeah. It loses itself in itself, and yet it's never really lost. And then it finds itself, and yet nothing is found. It's very strange.
Very, very strange. It even suffers profoundly as it is finding itself.
Well, it seems to. Then it discovers that it never suffered at all.
It's very painful to self-reflect on being lost in its own dream, the dreamer, and all the suffering which had been so unnecessary. Mm-hmm. It's a very futile sense of, can be profound suffering that is an experience here.
Yes, but the suffering is discovered to be a misinterpretation.
Yes.
The suffering is discovered to actually have not been suffering.
It's kind of sorrow.
It's like sleepwalking, or being in a delusion, being in a fever, or something where you're not seeing clearly. And when it comes to see clearly what it is, it discovers that the suffering was never suffering. It's just dissonant energy displays, which are totally non-threatening, totally not a problem, and just inevitable in the nature of this unfoldment, inevitable in the nature of this apparition.
Yeah.
And it seems to be suffering when it's lost in itself and it is misinterpreting itself as being actually lost, because of course it's not. That's a misunderstanding. It never is lost, And when it discovers that it isn't lost, then of course it discovers that it never suffered either. It was all a misunderstanding. It was all a confusion.
Also discovering its own power.
Yes.
The fear of the powerful being, the Sat being existence, the energetic awakening as if is so powerful that there is fear of what is this?
Yeah. There can be,
and to see it's me, so powerful, it's frightening.
Yeah. At first it can be frightening when you're still sort of in both worlds, when you're used to seeing from a personal point of view, and at the same time you can intuit this inconceivability, and from the personal point of view it's too much, and that can be fearful or jarring or provoke all sorts of delusions. But as you go through it, the fear dissipates because you discover that this power is actual, it's real, it's genuine, and it's what you are. So it's not a problem. It's nothing. There's no fear because there is nothing to fear, and there's no one to be afraid. It's just this one. The power of the radiance is one. So there's nothing to to work against anything else.
When I say one, the identified entity from the past, in there is a passage there. There is a passage there where one, imaginary one, becomes two.
Yeah, sure.
One becomes two. Or even three.
Sure. There's all sorts of strange, ways during the transition of this unfoldment, during the transition of this coming to know itself. There's all sorts of strange ways it can seem to be, and it can provoke enormous emotional reactions, and it can provoke all sorts of feelings of grandiosity. It can provoke all sorts of different responses, apparently, in the individual. And it can seem to be all sorts of different ways. But they're all just sort of the different layers of confusion, different layers of misinterpretation that one moves through as one comes to this actuality. And in the actuality, there is no confusion because there's no interpretation. There's no coherence, but that's not confusion because confusion is only a byproduct of interpretation, or a corollary of interpretation. And in reality, there is no actual interpretation.
That is the knowing, the silence, the knowing.
Yes, silence. Yes.
Yes,
knowing,
yes, and there is a period of complete desperation for answers.
Sure.
Desperate.
Yeah.
It's
But that's just a transition, so it's not too important.
Yeah.
You move through that, and it changes, and then that disappears, and you leave it behind you.
as if the content, the light and sound, the content, as if, as if it was multidimensional and dimensions are opening, but there is such sense of lostness. There is no answers. This sense of total lostness, being lost.
Absolutely, yes.
That's the desperation. That's the suffering. It's like, damn it, talk to me.
It turns out not to be suffering. It turns out to be the answer.
Yes.
It turns out to be home.
Yes, that's the answer.
But it's not what we expect. It's suffering and desperation when we expect it to be something other than that. When we first see this, what this is, it doesn't measure up. It doesn't live up to what we expected it to be, and so there can be a lot of confusion right there. But then we come to appreciate this. We come to appreciate how astounding this is, and we come to appreciate that this, just as it is the answer to all questions. And at that point, we relax. We let go into it. And we let go of these childish, expectations that it's not supposed to be like this. It's supposed to be like, whatever we think.
Yeah, and then every word is like too much. Every concept, every word, like, shut up.
Yeah, sure.
This is not it.
Yeah.
The knowing
Yeah.
prior, the before it's said something.
Yeah, and then after that, the words don't matter either because the words are it too. The words are themselves pure radiance.
Yes. After that, there is an art of communication. There is art.
Yes.
All the art.
Yes.
Thank you.
Peter, could you say something about choice? Or what is it, and what it seems to be around a lot, and then seems to be very elusive also.
Yeah. Well, choice is a way of orienting towards the flow of events. Choice is a way of orienting towards apparent participation. But it doesn't stand up to examination. It turns out to be an oversimplified interpretation of the way things happen. The notion of choice is predicated on the idea that you could choose this or you could choose that, and that there's a you that could choose, and that you're equally free to choose whatever you want. But none of that is accurate. You can't choose this, you can't choose that. There is no this or that, and there is no you that could choose anyway. Even though it may seem superficially to be like that, it's not actually like that. So when you look at the way the flow of events, let's call it, actually occurs, you'll discover that all event happens inconceivably. All event happens unanalyzably. So even when we say we're choosing, that's an oversimplification, and it's an assertion. So I can say, I'm choosing to drink water now, so I reach and I pick up my glass and I take a drink of water.
Mm-hmm.
I can say I chose to do it, but if I look more closely at the flow of events, why did I choose? Where did the motivation to do that show up from? Where does thirst show up from? Where does anything show up from? In other words, how do the actual elements that constitute events appear? What's their genesis? Are they being put there on purpose by me? Did I actually decide to drink water there, or is it just an empty claim? Like I could say, I'm choosing to beat my heart now every time my heart beats. And I could claim that, but is it really true? Where does the heartbeat come from? And does the heartbeat come from anywhere different than thirst comes from? Anywhere different than communication comes from? Why did you say those exact words that you said when you asked me that question? Why didn't you say some other words?
Mm-hmm.
You could say, well, I chose to. And you can say that as an assertion, but if you look more closely, how did those particular words emerge into your consciousness and come out your vocal cords, And you discover that it's subtle, it's complex, you can't say. It's a very mysterious and ultimately miraculous occurrence that is ungraspable as to where it comes from, how it comes, what it is, where it is, what it's doing. The entire thing is completely elusive, completely beyond analysis, and yet extremely actual, completely actual. So choice is an oversimplified way of understanding things that is completely inaccurate.
And at times it seems very, very actual and real and important.
Sure. Well, what we refer to as choice is actual and real and important, but it's not actually choice. It's actually this ongoing flow of events that we are intimately participating in on every level. But it's not choice or not choice. It's none of the above. It's a very strange event which is doing itself in an ungraspable way.
Right. So it's real and important, but it's neither of those things.
Yeah.
Either, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's essentially transcendental in the sense that it's entirely beyond graspability. It's entirely beyond analyzability. It's entirely beyond definability. You can't ever get to the bottom of what is actually happening. You can't get to the bottom of what actually happens when you make a choice. You can't actually get to the bottom of what happens in an event where you don't make a choice. So I can say, well, I'm choosing to say these words, but am I choosing to have those lights flash over there, Am I choosing to have gravity pull everything down? You know, look at that. Gravity's doing that. Am I choosing to do that? What's putting the gravity there? What's putting the lights there? What's putting these words here?
Mm.
Can I get to the bottom? Can I answer any of those questions? What that is? And if I look very closely and if I'm very honest, I can't. I can't say why these words are here. I can't say why this gravity is here.
Yeah. That's sort of the predicament we came in on in a way.
Yeah, sure.
And yet, I don't know, it seems like a good thing to sort of consider from time to time, even, you know.
Absolutely. Well, everything's a good thing to consider, because in considering it, we can discover this. We can discover that these things, that our way of holding these things the way we do is oversimplified. Mm-hmm. We can discover that there's something more going on, or something other going on, and that's a powerful discovery. It pushes the envelopes, it pushes the boundary of what we think our experience is, what we think our world is.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like from time to time we get further along the path, or whatever you want to call that. But then other times it looks like nothing has ever changed or moved or done anything.
Sure. But we're not competent to assess whether we're going further along a path. We're not competent to assess even if there is a path.
Yeah.
We're not competent to understand any of that, because again, if we look at all of those considerations, we can't get to the bottom of that either.
So what are we competent to do?
Just this.
Yeah. Okay.
This that we are doing.
Yeah. Thank you.
Hi, Peter. They say that a human birth is a rare and precious event. And I was wondering if, say, a California quail being born in the foothills of the Sierras was less rare and precious than, say, a human birth.
No. Let me qualify that. A human birth is a rare and precious event. A quail being born in the foothills of the Sierra is a rare and precious event. This flower sitting here is a rare and precious event. Me putting chai into this cup is a rare and precious event. You asking that question is a rare and precious event.
Okay, well, that's the answer I expected, and now I'm not lost.
Good. Because they're all the same event. They're all the same event. There's only one event. What's happening? What's happening here? Suppose there was a woman sitting here in this room and all of a sudden giving birth. Right? What would that be? That would be this event. And instead we're just sitting here talking, and that's this event. It's the same event. This flower sitting here, it's the same event. You know, you asking a question, it's the same event. So, you know, the event is this. The event is this entire thing. It doesn't come in pieces. It's not like there's this happening and that happening and that happening. This is happening. The universe is happening. Reality is happening. Mm-hmm. You know, it's one event, and a human birth is this event. Everything is this. The Holocaust is this event. A human death is this event. You know, what's the difference? We qualify it. We say, oh, there's this and there's that. We make all these differences. We draw all these differences. There's this flower and this cup. You know, and this bottle, and this table, and the Holocaust, and, you know, and a bird in the Sierras, and a human birth, and this, and all these names, all these designations, you know, but they're all designations within and of one thing, this. You know, if there wasn't this, there would be no cup. If there wasn't this, there would be no flower. If there wasn't this, there would be no human birth. They are all just versions of this. It's like a dream, you know. In a dream you can talk about all the things that are there. You can talk about, oh, I'm here, and this car is here, and this person I'm talking to is here, and this monster I'm running away from is here. All these designations, but they all refer to one thing. They all just refer to the dream. The dream doesn't have pieces, it doesn't have parts. When you wake up, it all disappears at one. When you go to sleep, everything disappears at the same time. It doesn't disappear when it's not like this cup disappears and then the table disappears and the bottle disappears and the flower disappears and the human birth disappears and the, you know, it isn't like that, is it? You go to sleep and it all just goes, phew. One thing disappears. And in that one thing disappears, everything disappears. So there's all these designations. But they're just names, they're just designations. There's like, how many things could you point at now in your field of vision? Well, an infinite number. Oh, I'm pointing at that, I'm pointing at that, I'm pointing at that, I'm pointing at that, I'm pointing. Does that mean that there's infinite things? You're just pointing at one thing. You're pointing at your field of vision. It's one thing. There's only one thing you're seeing, which is vision. You're seeing light, right? You're not seeing lots of things. And we have all these names for all these subgroupings that appear within our experience, and we have the delusion that they're separate things and separate events and somehow disconnected from each other. But you can't take any event and take it out of the field of your experience and hold it over here. I can't take this cup and take it out of my field of vision and hold it over there and say, see, the cup is still here. The cup's only here as long as my field of vision's here. As soon as I close my eyes, the cup's gone. And you're gone, the room's gone, everything's gone. There's only one thing here, my field of vision, not a lot of chairs and people and rooms and lights and cups and flowers and... All that there is a bubble. And that bubble is your experience. And it's floating in absolute infinity. And there is nothing else whatsoever. Everything whatsoever is within that bubble. And you are that bubble. It's that simple.
Peter, along the lines of a previous questioner, I wanted to explore with you this apparent line between practice and no practice. In my own recent attempts, or whatever I'm doing to engage this path, and I've taken to heart your advice to hang out with Longchenpa, those books I've been reading a lot. And I just read a small, one sentence, or it doesn't take very much of it. It's not so clear and direct, just as what you're saying is. And so every once in a while, I just have this flash, and it's so inconceivably vast. Like any little effort that I make, like to try and meditate or do some practice, it's such a tiny thing compared to the space, whatever you want to call it.
Yes.
And so that's just totally fascinating.
So you mentioned that there is a difference between pain and suffering. Mm-hmm. So if someone is having a spinal cord cancer and they're in great pain, the pain is real.
Yes.
And you have narcotic medications to reduce the pain or whatever. Mm-hmm. But different people have different reactions to their experience with the cancer and the pain. Mm-hmm. So how would you elucidate that as far as someone who is understanding spirituality and spiritualness or whatever, as far as handling the pain versus suffering? It's very painful.
Yeah. Well, pain is the presence of sensation. And in experience is nothing but the presence of sensation. But it's impersonal. It's not, it is present, but it is not, it has no personal implications. So, the sun shines and it is present, but it's not personal. Likewise, what we call pain is a present sensation, just like the light of the sun. And you orient towards it in whatever way you can. For example, if say you're out in the desert and the sun is shining and it's very hot, it's too hot, you don't need to sit down and cry, and you don't need to get sad. You can try and find some shade if you can. And if you can't find shade, you maybe dig under the sand and try and cover yourself. You do whatever you can to get out of the sun if you're motivated to do that. And suppose you can't get out of the sun. Suppose you're just in flat rock that stretches on for thousands of miles and there's no shade at all. Well, then you can't get out of the sun. You're going to get burned. That's just a fact. The burn will be an intense sensation, but all sensation is intense in its own way. And the worst that'll happen is it'll kill you, but something's going to kill you anyway, sooner or later. So by all means, if you have pain, you can... Suffering comes from taking the sensation personally. Suffering comes from saying, oh, this pain is horrible, I shouldn't be having it, oh no, what am I going to do, this is terrible, oh no. So you're catastrophized, you're worrying, you wallow in a storyline, an interpretation about the sensation, instead of just, which is in addition to the presence of just the sensation itself. Sensation is impersonal, and it's possible to see that it's impersonal. If you can see the sensation is impersonal, you're free of suffering. If the sensation is intense, then it is intense. Suppose a bomb went off outside this building in the street right now. It would be very, very loud. It would be a very intense sensation. So it's an intense sensation. Sensations come and go with different degrees of apparent intensity, but all sensation is actually equally intense in its actuality. So in practical terms, you can deal with pain whatever way is practical. If you have pain, if you can take painkillers or morphine or something, this is fine. If it helps, that's nice. If it doesn't help, then it doesn't. So, and that's just the fact. And then so you have intense experience. It's possible to have pain, very strong pain, that you can't relieve. It's not relievable. And if that's the case, then that's your experience. But it doesn't have to be suffering. It's just, it only becomes suffering when you have a story about it. So suppose I was in a car crash and my skin was all burned. I got gasoline on me or something, and so all my skin is all burned off, but I lived. So I'm lying in the hospital, I'm in intense pain. All of my skin is just like razor blades or whatever, right? And they give me morphine or whatever, and it sort of makes me dizzy, but it doesn't really stop it. It's still just intense for months. Well, that's my experience. It's going to be like that. It's going to be an intense sensation. I can sit there and go crazy. I can say, oh, I wish this wasn't happening. It's not supposed to be happening. I'm supposed to be somewhere else, Why is this happening to me? You know, all these horrible things. Look at these other people. They're not burned. Why am I burned? This is terrible. And so it's like telling a story. It's like having an announcer off to the side. You know, it's narrating the events and interpreting it and assigning value judgments to things as being good or bad, desirable or undesirable. And that's what generates suffering. But the pain itself is just an intense experience. And you deal with it as best you can. We've all had intense pain. You know, we've all had it. We break our bones, or most people, I suppose, have had some kind of intense pain. And yet it comes and it goes. You know. Most of us sitting here, I suppose, right now aren't in intense pain. But I bet most of us, or a lot of us, have been in situations where we felt intense pain, right? So these kinds of extreme situations, or we've been in a situation where there's very, very loud noises. Right now there's no loud noises. So these different qualities of sensation come and go, but they're impersonal. They don't matter because they're impersonal. They just appear and disappear. You know, right now it's pretty dark in here. That's just a fact. It's not a problem. It could be very bright in here. We could turn all the lights up and then it would be very bright. And that would be a fact, but it's not a problem. It's just a fact. And likewise, a strong sensation like pain is a fact. It's not a problem necessarily. It's only a problem if we make it a problem with interpretation by saying, oh, it's not supposed to be like this. I'm sorry, that was a little bit rambling. But I mean, you can experiment with it. You know, you can take, give yourself a strong sensation. I mean, obviously, it's not necessarily like a strong, bone cancer or something, I suppose. But give yourself a strong sensation. You don't need to hurt yourself. You can poke yourself or, do something that's uncomfortable. And you can feel it, and it's just the energy that's there. And it was a time it wasn't there, and then it's there, and then it's gone. And it comes and goes like the sun. Sun rises, the sun sets. Sometimes it's bright, sometimes it's not. And it doesn't mean anything. It doesn't matter. It's just a strange presence of unknown qualities. And that's really the point, is to notice that experience is nothing but the strange presence of unknown qualities. We don't know what anything is. We don't know what light is. We don't know what sound is. We don't know what thought is. We don't know what pleasure is. We don't know what pain is. We don't know what these things are. Sometimes they appear, and sometimes they disappear at different degrees. And we don't know what it is. We don't know what's doing it. We don't know why. Why is there light? Why is there sound? Why is there pain? They're just, these strange energy qualities that appear and disappear.
Peter, would you say that the suffering is brought about? Would you say that the suffering is brought about by adding the component that we don't want it to be there, or whatever that experience, we don't want it to be there?
Exactly. The suffering is generated by interpretation.
Always? Yeah.
Always.
Amazing. But if
likewise, pleasure is generated by interpretation. I mean, in a sense, as the opposite of suffering. Mm-hmm. Suffering is an interpretation of something that is basically painful. Pleasure is an interpretation of something that is essentially positive in some sense.
Yeah. Like if we didn't add that interpretation,
then what would it be?
No.
It would be actual. Pain would still be pain is still pain, but pain and suffering are two different things.
Yeah. Like the suffering adds some greater, some more depth or something to it.
Does it add something or does
Well,
it take something away? Pain is a sensation is an amazing inconceivability, whereas suffering in our storylines are very simple and dull. It's like a stick figure. It's like a black and white, movie or something. It's an overly simplified version. The actual sensation itself. I mean, for example, let's say, I say, well, what's happening here? Oh, I'm just looking at a glass. So in looking at a glass, it becomes uninteresting, it becomes dull, it becomes little, it becomes unimportant. If I don't say what it is, what is this that's happening? What is happening here? It's amazing. It's multidimensional, it's infinitely complex and subtle, it's dynamic, it has, it's endlessly interesting and fascinating. You can have that, you can have, it's just a glass half full of water, just a boring glass. You see the difference? It becomes small and simple and uninteresting in the interpretation. And pain and pleasure are the same way. We make them little, we make them known, we make them overly simplified in interpretation. What's actually present experientially is amazing, these textures. I mean, what is pain? The next time you have a sharp pain or a strong pain, trip on it. I mean, instead of just sitting there going, oh, this is terrible. I mean, just meditate on it. Let yourself go and travel into it. Pretend the pain is like a universe that you could fly into and explore and see what it was like. It'll surprise the hell out of you. And it's a whole lot more, not less, than just the simple pain of suffering. Oh, this pain is terrible, I don't want to stop. That makes it dull and inert and static and simple, when in actuality it's dynamic and multidimensional and just endlessly fascinating. Anyway, it's about quitting time, so I'm going to have to stop in the middle of things, if there were any things to be in the middle of, and wish our online friends